Hey, 21st century people. Cozy there, lying in your warm bed with your phone in hand? Well, enjoy it while it lasts. Because today we're diving into a world where your bed is literally straw thrown on a stone floor, and the only entertainment available is watching people get torn apart by wild animals. Welcome to the life of a gladiator in ancient Rome. If you're ready for a night of deep sleep lulled by stories of blood, sand, and death, take a deep breath. Smell the metallic sweat in the air. Hear the deafening roar of 50,000 Romans thirsty for violence, and feel the rough sand sticking to your blood-covered skin. Your blood? Maybe. Depends on how good you are with a sword. Now let's meet your new self, a Roman gladiator. Congratulations, you'll probably die. But hey, at least you'll be entertainment for a crowd. Let's start with the first part. Your first and maybe last day as a gladiator. Ever felt like a fish out of water? Well, gladiators were literally men out of place. Slaves, prisoners of war, convicted criminals, and occasionally some crazy volunteers looking for fame and glory. The word gladiator comes from gladius, meaning short Roman sword. Basically, you were the sword guy. Not very creative, I know. The Romans were practical even in the nicknames they gave to people forced to kill each other for entertainment. Picture this. You were a Celt, a Germanic tribesman, or a Gaul living a peaceful life farming potatoes or whatever your people did, when suddenly, bam, the Romans invade your village. If you didn't die in battle, congratulations. You won a one-way ticket to becoming bloody entertainment in the empire's capital. Some basic facts about you, new gladiator. You're probably not Roman. Most were conquered peoples. Your social status is basically talking property. Your survival chances in the first year? About 10%. Your most ambitious dream? Not dying long, enough to earn freedom. Your biggest fear? Literally everything around you. If you're thinking, wow, what a miserable life, well, you're right. But hold on, we haven't even gotten to the living conditions yet. Your new home, the ludus, or how to call a prison a training academy. Forget those spacious barracks from the movies. Your new address is a cramped cubicle in a complex called a ludus, a bizarre mix of prison, military camp, and CrossFit hell. The smell. Imagine a blend of concentrated sweat from hundreds of men, dried blood, tanned leather, poorly managed feces, and the constant aroma of fear. If you think the gym locker room after peak hours is bad, this is practically Chanel No. 5 in comparison. Your room is a 2x3 metre space with bare stone walls. Your bed. A thin straw mat thrown on the cold floor. No windows. Why would they give you an escape route? The only light comes from an oil lamp that burns your eyes at night. Oh, and you share this little paradise with at least 2 other guys. If you were lucky enough to be sent to an imperial ludus in Rome, conditions were slightly better. If you ended up in some provincial ludus run by a cheap lanista, gladiator businessman, well, let's just say you'll miss the days when you were just a regular prisoner of war. Security is tight. Think of it as the Hotel California Roman edition. You can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave. Armed guards patrol day and night. The doors are locked. The windows, if they exist, are barred. And the punishment for escape attempts? Crucifixion, if you're lucky. If not, you'll fight unarmed against a starving lion as special entertainment before the main event. Welcome to your new home. You'll live here until you die in the arena, likely. You earn your freedom after years of fighting, rare. You die of infection or disease, very common. The sun isn't even up yet, and you're already being woken by the shouts of the doctor, the head trainer, usually a retired gladiator. He's not your friend. In fact, he probably hates you for reminding him of where he came from. No coffee, no hot shower, no checking emails. You get up, drag yourself outside, and start your day with exercises that would make a modern Olympic athlete cry. Your breakfast is a bowl of thick barley porridge with some mixed veggies, maybe a piece of stale bread if your lanista is feeling generous. It's not tasty, but it's surprisingly nutritious. After all, starving gladiators aren't good entertainment. Gladiators were often called hordeari, barley eaters. Their diet was high in carbs and low in protein, not for muscle definition, but to develop a protective layer of fat under the skin. Chubby gladiators survived longer than ripped ones. Now the real fun begins. Gladiator training was brutal, methodical, and relentless. You weren't just learning to fight, you were learning to entertain while fighting. First lesson, how to die beautifully. I'm not kidding. You were taught to fall dramatically, take wounds with dignity, and die in a way that made the crowd cheer. If you were going to die, at least do it with style. Training included weapons drills with wooden swords twice as heavy as real ones, training posts, payless, where you struck repeatedly until your arms felt like jelly, specialised training for your fighting style, more on that later, conditioning that would make a marathon runner puke. The doctor doesn't care about your blisters, sore muscles, or desire to die. The only thing worse than training. Being thrown into the arena unprepared, which meant certain death, and worse, boring death for the audience. Lunch break. More barley, more veggies, occasionally some meat, maybe even a cup of posca, watered down sour wine to keep you hydrated. The gladiator diet was surprisingly well planned, not because they cared about you, but because you were an expensive investment. During this break, you could treat minor injuries, chat with other gladiators, or just sit and reflect on the life choices that brought you here. Probably none, since you were enslaved. The afternoon was dedicated to specialised training. Depending on your gladiator type, yes, there were different classes like a morbid real-life RPG. You practiced specific moves, combat strategies, and, most importantly, how to make it all look impressive. Because remember, you're not just a fighter, you're an entertainer. An entertainer who might die at any moment, but still needs to smile for the camera. Okay, no cameras, but you get the idea. After hours of sweating like a pig, you finally get a chance to clean up. The fancier luders had their own baths. The cheaper ones. A bucket of cold water and good luck. Hygiene was surprisingly important. Infections killed more gladiators than swords. You'd also get basic medical treatment for any training injuries. Gladiator doctors were some of the most advanced in the ancient world. They got a lot of practice patching up human bodies. Dinner was usually the most substantial meal. More barley, shocker, cooked veggies, occasionally meat, and sometimes even watered down wine. Not a feast, but enough to refuel for another day of torture. After dinner, you were locked in your cell to sleep. Some ludus allowed small luxuries like board games, improvised music or storytelling. After all, bored gladiators were prone to rebellion, and then you'd sleep, dreaming of the arena that might soon be your grave, only to wake up and do it all over again. This brings us to part 2, the Gladiator Catalogue. Choose your character. So you've arrived at the ludus. The lanista examines you like a farmer sizing up cattle. Based on your physique, agility, and temperament, he decides what kind of gladiator you'll be. Yes, this was basically an RPG class system, just with much more permanent consequences. Let's meet the main types. Murmillo, the fish tank. Wearing a fish-shaped helmet, yes, a fish, Romans had a weird sense of humour. The Murmillo was the tank gladiator, heavily armoured, armed with a large, rectangular shield, scutum, and the gladius, short Roman sword. If you were big, strong, and not very agile, congratulations. You just won yourself a fish costume, and the expectation of fighting someone much faster than you. Thrakes, Thracian. The exotic rebel, representing the Thracians, you fought with a small square shield, a curved sword, sicca, and leg guards. Your helmet had a wide brim and a stylish crest. The curved sword was especially nasty, made to tear flesh, not just stab. If you were average height, agile, and had a mean look, you'd likely be a Thraex. Your lighter armour allowed faster movement, but also meant you bled more easily. Retiarius, the net man, the most peculiar of all. Armed with a net, a trident, and a dagger, the Retiarius was the nearly naked gladiator. Seriously, you fought practically bare, with only a shoulder guard. If you were skinny, agile, and apparently didn't mind flashing your privates to 50,000 people while fighting for your life, this was your fate. Secutor, the netman hunter. designed specifically to fight the retiarius. The secutor, pursuer, had a smooth, rounded helmet where the net couldn't catch, armed like a mumio but lighter. If you were athletic, relentless, and patient, you might become a secutor. Your job? Chase the slippery retiarius around the arena until you could finish him. Provocator, the classic duelist. The most Roman of gladiators, the provocator wore equipment similar to legionaries, a rectangular breastplate, a visored helmet, a large shield, and the trusty gladius. If you had an average build and discipline, you'd likely be a provocator. You mostly fought other provocatores in what Romans considered fair fights, as fair as forced death matches can be. Crucellarius, the armoured tank. Rare and impressive, the Crucellarius was covered head to toe in heavy armour. If you were exceptionally strong and tough, you might get this role. The downside? You could barely move. The upside? It was very hard to kill you, at least quickly. Dimachurus, the dual-wielding master, armed with 2 swords, Dimachurus. Literally means two-knife man, and little armour. This was the Roman equivalent of an anime character. If you were extremely agile, acrobatic, and apparently suicidal, you might become a Dimachurus. You were flashy, lethal, and would die from one well-placed hit. Esidarius, the chariot warrior. Inspired by British warriors who fought from chariots, the Esidarius started the fight on a chariot before dismounting for hand-to-hand combat. If you had horse skills and a flair for showmanship, you might get this role. At least you got a chariot ride before possibly dying. Equites, the knights, started fights on horseback with lances and round shields before dismounting for sword combat. You could ride and had a noble look, even as a slave. You might become an eques, considered one of the more honourable types, which meant absolutely nothing when you were bleeding in the sand. Sagittarius, the archer. Rare in traditional arenas, the Sagittarius used a bow and arrow, usually in special shows or historical reenactments. If you had good aim and a certain detachment from reality, you might become a Sagittarius. Your role was more theatrical than combative. Your gladiator type wasn't your choice. It was based on the ludus's needs, your physique, and what the trainer thought would sell best. Remember, you weren't a warrior. You were an entertainment product. Well, now is the time to turn you into a real gladiator. So you've been assigned one of these gladiator types. What happens now? Your transformation from a terrified prisoner to a sun-tanned killing machine begins. Phase 1, surviving initial training. The first months as a novice, novitius, were brutal. Many didn't even survive this phase. The training wasn't just about teaching you to fight, it was designed to break your old identity and rebuild you as a gladiator. You learned combat basics with heavily weighted wooden weapons, rudies. The logic was simple. If you could swing a wooden gladius twice the normal weight, the real metal version would feel light as a feather. Novices trained by repeatedly striking wooden posts, payless, until the movements became automatic. Imagine doing the same motion thousands of times a day, every day, until you could do it in your sleep. At this stage, many tried to escape or kill themselves. Those who stayed often formed close bonds. Nothing unites people like shared trauma. Phase 2, specialization and refinement. Once you mastered the basics and hadn't died or offed yourself, you began specialized training for your specific gladiator type. You learned not just to fight, but to fight with style. Unnecessarily dramatic moves were encouraged. Heroic poses were practiced. You were taught to make even a simple death look, like a tragic opera. At this stage, trainers often gave promising gladiators stage names, something like Tigress of Gaul or Flamma the Invincible. Think of it as wrestling personas, but with fatal consequences. Phase 3, mental conditioning, accepting your fate. The most crucial part of training was psychological. You had to accept that your old life was over. You were now property of the ludus, a tool for entertainment. The gladiator's oath, Sacramentum Gladiatorium, was explicit. I swear to endure burning, chains, flogging, and death by the sword. Not exactly inspiring, but at least it was honest. You were taught to face death with dignity, to die well if necessary, to accept the editor's decision, the man who decided if you lived or died, without protest. Ironically, this gave many gladiators a strange inner peace. Once you accept you'll probably die, life's petty annoyances lose meaning. Phase 4. Fatigue, the deadliest phase. After minutes of intense combat, both gladiators would show signs of exhaustion. This was often the most dangerous phase, slower. Reflexes meant more wounds. The critical moment. Eventually, one fighter would make a mistake or be overpowered. A decisive strike would land. The loser, wounded and unable to fight effectively, had to signal defeat. A defeated gladiator would raise an index finger, ad digitum, drop his weapons and raise a hand, begging for mercy at this point. The fight stopped. The judgment. Thumbs. Up or down. Contrary to popular belief, the famous thumbs down, pollis verso, likely didn't mean death. Modern historians think the death signal was either a thumb pointed at the chest, mimicking a stab, a thumb hidden inside a fist, the defeated. Gladiator knelt in the sand, awaiting the editor's verdict. He'd gauge the crowd's reaction. If you fought bravely and stylishly, the crowd waved handkerchiefs, chanting "Mitte," let him go. If you fought poorly or cowardly, they screamed "Jugula," kill him, and made the death gesture. The editor rarely went against the crowd. These events were political theatre. An unpopular sponsor wouldn't advance his career. If spared, Mrs., you lived to fight another day. If condemned, jugulatus, your opponent delivered a mercy strike, a quick thrust to the throat or base of the skull. A morbid truth, the winning gladiator rarely celebrated an execution. There was an unspoken code of respect among fighters. You were all brothers in misery. Killing a defeated opponent was a solemn duty, not a victory lap. Survival. What now? Let's imagine the best case scenario. You survived your first fight. Maybe even won. What happens next? If you won, you'd receive a palm frond, symbol of victory. Sometimes a crown prize money. A cut went to your lanista, but you kept some. After the fight, you'd return to the ludus for medical care. Gladiator doctors were exceptionally skilled for their time. They got lots of practice. Wounds were cleaned, stitched, and you'd get recovery time based on severity. Most importantly, you earned reputation. In the gladiator world, reputation meant better survival odds. A popular fighter was rarely sentenced to death even when defeated. This raises a suspicion for us. What was happening away from the public eye? Gladiatorial spectacles were a massive business in ancient Rome. Let's break down the numbers to give you an idea. A rookie gladiator cost between 1,000 to 2,000 denarii. For reference, a Roman legionary earned about 900 denarii per year. A famous gladiator could be worth 15,000 denarii or more. A single day of games in Imperial Rome could cost the equivalent of millions in today's dollars. In short, you were an expensive investment. That's why, contrary to popular belief, most fights weren't to the death. Historians estimate only 10-20% of matches ended fatally. Killing gladiators regularly would have been terrible for business. Lannister, gladiator managers, operated like a mix of sports agents and horse trainers. They bought slaves and prisoners, trained them into fighters, rented them out for games, sold top performers for huge profits. Every decision was based on profit potential. A functioning arena required a massive support crew, including specialised doctors, to patch up wounds quickly, clean-up crews, to mop up blood and drag bodies out between matches, death inspectors, slaves dressed as Charon, ferrymen, of the underworld, or Hermes, who checked fallen gladiators for signs of life, sometimes with a hot iron to the face, brutal but effective. Musicians played dramatic scores to heighten tension during fights. Announcers called out fighters, names and narrated highlights like primitive sports commentators. Gambling was huge in gladiator culture. Everyone bet, from slaves to senators, prostitutes to priests. Archaeologists in Pompeii found graffiti showing odds for different gladiators, win-loss records complaints about fixed matches. Yes, rigged fights happened. Gladiators knew who was favoured. adding even more psychological pressure. The crowd's cheers, or boos, could mean the difference between living or dying by public demand. But your life was not only defined in the arena. The life outside the arena, sex, celebrity, and barley. If you survived long enough and demonstrated skill and charisma, you could become genuinely famous. Popular gladiators were the celebrities of ancient Rome. Their faces appeared on souvenirs, oil lamps and mosaics, graffiti on Pompeii's walls. Shows obsessive fans tracked every fight. Women and men of the Roman elite often developed fixations on famous gladiators. Spiculus, so popular Emperor Nero gave him a mansion and lands. Flamma fought 34 times, refused freedom 4 times, because he loved fame. Carpophorus, beast slayer extraordinaire, known as the Beast of Beasts. Marcus Attilius started as a free volunteer, defeated consecutive champions. Astyanax, victor of countless fights under Emperor Commodus. At the height of gladiator mania, crowds knew their favourite gladiators' names, win records, fighting styles, and even battle cries. Organised fan clubs wore different colours and sang chants to support their idols. Think modern soccer hooligans, but with a much more explicit thirst for blood. Okay, let's talk about what you really want to know. Did gladiators have sex? Oh, yes. A lot. Gladiators were considered irresistible by many Roman women, especially the elite. The satirical poet Juvenal bitterly complained about noble women getting hot and bothered over men with ugly scars and big helmets. Quick facts about gladiators' sex lives. Noble women often paid to visit gladiators after fights. The price? Astronomical. Discretion? Minimal. Social risk. For an elite Roman woman, being caught with a gladiator could ruin her reputation. Didn't stop many of them. Yes, there were adult toys modelled after famous gladiators. The Romans were way ahead in some ways. Emperor Commodus, that psychopath from Gladiator, allegedly kept a harem in his private ludus while playing Gladiator. Clearly, the rules were different for emperors. Gladiator fame created a mythology around their lives, but daily reality was far less glamorous. Unlike modern athletes with precisely calculated diets, gladiators ate to develop protective fat layers. Their typical diet: barley, lots of barley. The staple, served as porridge, bread, or beer. Legumes, beans, lentils, and grains for protein. Little meat, expensive and considered inefficient for their desired physique. Plant ashes, yes, you heard that right. They drank a tonic made from plant ashes, rich in calcium, a primitive supplement to strengthen bones. Archaeological evidence from gladiator skeletons shows high strontium levels, indicating a mostly vegetarian diet. It also reveals unusually high bone density, that ash supplement actually worked. Housing depended entirely on status. Novice or loser, a tiny cell in the ludus, often chained at night. Mid-tier gladiator, a small private room, unchained but still locked. Arena star, possibly luxurious quarters. Some even lived outside the ludus, with escorts, of course. Rudiarius, freed gladiator, could own a home, often near the amphitheatre. In their rare downtime, gladiators played board games like La Trincula, similar to chess, and tesserae, dice games. Drank wine. In moderation, drunkenness was harshly punished. Exchanged stories and songs from their homelands. Practiced religious cults. Many worshipped Hercules, Mars, or Eastern deities like Mithras. Were gladiators well paid? Yes and no. Technically, as slaves, they didn't receive a salary. They earned cash prizes, premia for victories. Part went to the ludus, part could be saved. Some received gifts from wealthy fans. Famous gladiators could amass small fortunes. Some used their earnings to eventually buy freedom. Top-tier gladiators enjoyed special privileges, better food, access to prostitutes or visits from admirers, the right to keep small personal belongings, occasionally escorted outings to public events, the right to refuse certain opponents, negotiated by the lanista. So how do you get rid of this hell? There were exactly 3 ways to leave the gladiator life. Death, the most common. Official liberation, rare. Successful escape, extremely rare. Let's focus on the options that don't involve you being impaled or dismembered in the arena. The rudies, the symbol of freedom. After years of service, usually 5 to 10, depending on luck and skill, an exceptionally successful gladiator could earn the rudies, a ceremonial wooden sword symbolizing emancipation. The rudies could be granted by an editor, sponsor, as a reward for extraordinary courage or skill. The emperor as a public gesture of generosity. The gladiator themselves, if they'd saved enough money to buy their freedom. Receiving the rudies was a deeply emotional moment, often celebrated in the arena with roaring crowds. The freed gladiator, Rudiarius, performed a ritual cutting ties with the ludus and was formally recognized as a free man again. Many Rudiari stayed in the gladiatorial world as trainers, referees or entrepreneurs. After all, it was the only life they knew. Some even returned to the arena voluntarily for money. Once a gladiator, always a gladiator. The price? Astronomical. Often several times your original purchase price, the lanista, trainer, owner, needed to recoup his investment and lost profits from your retirement. It typically took 10 to 15 years of successful fights to save enough, assuming you won regular prizes and received gifts from admirers. Marriage, the romantic and extremely rare. Exit. In exceptionally rare cases, a wealthy woman could buy and free a gladiator she admired, sometimes to marry him. This was scandalous, and cost her significant social status, but it did happen. Records exist of marriages between equestrian-class women and ex-gladiators. Emperor Commodus tried banning these marriages, not out of morality, but because he was jealous of gladiators' popularity. Seriously. Escape, the suicidal option. Fleeing a ludus was near suicide. Security was tight. Punishments for attempts were gruesome, and even if you escaped, where would you go? Your body bore identifiable scars. You had no money or connections, and your face was likely known city-wide. The most famous escape was, of course, Spartacus, the Thracian gladiator who led history's largest slave revolt, 73 to 71 BCE. He and his followers defeated multiple Roman legions before being crushed by Crassus and Pompey. The aftermath: 6,000 captured slaves were crucified along the Appian Way from Rome to Capua. The message was clear. Don't follow Spartacus's example. Retirement. Now what? You achieved the impossible, survival and freedom. What's next for an ex-gladiator? Option 1. Stay in the gladiator world. Most Rudiari remained in the only world they knew. Doctores. Became trainers, turning novices into killing machines. Summa Rudis. Worked as referees, overseeing arena fights. Lanistae. The most ambitious ran their own ludus. A natural transition. They knew the business, had respect, and leveraged their reputations. Option 2. Private security. Ex-gladiators were prized as bodyguards, security, and military instructors. Some wealthy Romans kept famous ex-gladiators in their entourages for protection and status. During civil wars, many were recruited as elite soldiers or combat trainers. Their melee expertise was invaluable. Option 3. Public celebrity. The truly famous could monetize their reputations, paid appearances at public events, product endorsements. Yes, this existed in ancient Rome. Dictating memoirs. Most were illiterate. Paid combat demonstrations. Option 4. Normal life. Some tried blending into society, opening small businesses with their savings, returning to their homelands, if foreign-born, building families and quiet lives. This was often the hardest path. Physical and psychological scars lingered. many suffered what we'd now call PTSD. Social reintegration was tricky. Ex-gladiators were both admired and distrusted. Death and legacy. The final exit. The brutal truth: most gladiators didn't live long enough to retire. The average lifespan of an active gladiator was 25-30 years. When gladiators died in the arena, their treatment depended on status. Common gladiators, dragged out with hooks, stripped of valuable gear, and dumped in mass graves. Popular gladiators, sometimes given proper funerals, funded by the ludus or wealthy fans. True stars could receive elaborate tombs with inscriptions detailing their victories. In Ephesus, archaeologists found a gladiator-exclusive cemetery with engraved tombstones listing their weapons, win counts, and manner of death. The cult of the gladiator. A bizarre Roman belief, the mystical power of dead gladiators. Their blood was considered medicinal, especially for epilepsy. Women drank gladiators' sweat to boost libido and fertility. Body parts of famous gladiators were sold as good luck charms. Macabre? Absolutely. But it shows the near-mythic status these fighters held in the Roman imagination.